What if the person you trusted most, the one you loved, was secretly plotting your death? A life taken in the quiet of the night, with no one suspecting what was really happening behind closed doors. On the morning of June 29, 2017, a woman's life was violently cut short in her own home. The scene was horrifying, a brutal execution, but what made it even more chilling was the calmness of those closest to her. It seemed like a random act, but things were far from what they seemed. As detectives start piecing together the evidence, they discover something shocking. A deep web of lies and secrets that lead them to question everything. Was this a tragedy orchestrated by someone with much more to gain than anyone could have imagined? The more they uncover, the more chilling the truth becomes. But just when they thought they had it figured out, another clue leads them down an unexpected path. Who had the most to lose? And what was the true motive behind this brutal crime? Stay tuned, because the truth is more twisted than anyone could have guessed. What's really going on behind the surface? Keep watching to find out, because nothing is what it seems.
Welcome to True Crimes Unlimited, where the darkest secrets meet the brightest minds. I'm your host, and I'll be guiding you to the most shocking, the most disturbing, and most fascinating true crime stories from around the world. From the twisted minds of serial killers to the intricate webs of deceit, we'll dive into the depths of human nature and explore the crimes that will leave you speechless. And as we unravel the mysteries, you'll be drawn into a world of intrigue, suspense, and fascination. So, if you're ready to delve into the unknown, to confront the darkness, and uncover the truth, then join me on this journey into the world of true crime. Subscribe now, and let's uncover the secrets together.
Yuri Jenkins came from a world where struggle was the norm. Born into poverty, he faced emotional and financial hardships throughout his life. But despite the challenges, Yuri dreamed of a life of affluence. His desire for wealth wasn't just about luxury. It was about escaping the hardships that defined his early years. He wanted more. He needed more. And he believed that with the right moves, he could achieve it. But at what cost? On the other hand, Makeva Jenkins was the embodiment of success. A driven entrepreneur, a devoted mother, and a loving wife, she had built a thriving business and a promising future for her family. Makeva wasn't just surviving. She was succeeding, something that seemed beyond Yuri's reach. But for all of her achievements, one thing she hadn't accounted for was the quiet resentment simmering beneath the surface of her marriage. Yuri's discontentment was growing, and it was eating away at him, slowly turning into something darker. Yuri's circle was one that fueled his ambitions, but not in a healthy way. He had associated himself with people who shared his desire for wealth, but these were the kinds of people who had no moral compass. They were only concerned with the quickest path to success, no matter the cost. How much influence did these people have on Yuri's decisions? Could they have been the ones who planted the seeds of greed in his mind, leading him down a path from which there was no return? To the outside world, Yuri and Makeva seemed like the perfect couple. They had 3 beautiful children, a modest home, and an image of happiness. Makeva was flourishing in her career, and Yuri was working tirelessly to provide for his family. But behind the curtains of their seemingly perfect life, there was tension. The cracks were starting to show, but no one could see them. At least, not yet. Yuri's frustrations were growing. He had always been ambitious, but now he was desperate. Desperate to provide his family with a life that was beyond what he had ever known. But more than that, he wanted to own that life. Makeva's success, while admirable, only seemed to highlight Yuri's growing dissatisfaction with his own life. Her rise was his reminder that he was stuck in a never-ending cycle of financial struggle, and that anger began to fester. Was Yuri simply frustrated by his financial struggles? Or was there something deeper? Was his ambition turning into obsession? And if so, how far was he willing to go to change his life? Did he truly love Makeva, or was her success simply a stepping stone to his own escape? The first cracks in Yuri's facade were subtle. At home, he began to withdraw. His once loving demeanor turned to coldness, and Makeva noticed the changes. The tension between them grew palpable, though neither dared to confront it directly. Instead, Yuri sought other outlets, other ways to deal with his mounting frustrations. And then, he found it, the life insurance policy. Suddenly, Makeva's life became not just a source of pride, but a means to an end. Yuri's obsession with wealth and the security he thought he deserved pushed him further away from the man he once was. As Makeva continued to flourish in her business ventures, Yuri's jealousy grew. It wasn't just about the money. Makeva had something he didn't: control. She was in charge of her destiny, while Yuri felt trapped. Could it have been more than financial envy? Was he angry that Makeva was living the life he had always dreamed of? His desires were no longer just material. They were deeply personal, and that's where the danger began. Was Yuri truly resentful of Makeva's success, or was there something even more sinister lurking beneath his surface? Was his mind already spiraling, plotting a way out of his frustration, or was he still clinging to the belief that he could have it all without crossing a line? As the months went by, Yuri's financial troubles became more desperate. The debts piled up, and his ambitions continued to feed his growing resentment. The people around him, the ones who shared his desire for wealth and success, had no qualms about using any means necessary to get ahead. This dangerous mindset began to seep into Yuri's thinking. If he couldn't earn his fortune the right way, maybe he could take a shortcut, one that would solve everything at once. The life insurance policy had always been there, like a quiet temptation in the background. But now it was more than just a policy. It was his ticket to freedom. The more he thought about it, the more he rationalized the idea. He could take the money. He could escape the life he hated and finally give his children the future he had dreamed of. But there was one thing standing in his way: Makeva. And that's where the darkness of his plan began to take shape. Could he really go through with it? Was the temptation of quick wealth strong enough to outweigh the love and loyalty he once had for his wife? Or had his desire for control and affluence already consumed him? It was the early hours of June 29, 2017. The night was still, and the air was thick with tension. Yuri Jenkins had carefully planned everything. He had spent months thinking about it, strategizing, finding the right people, ensuring that each step would lead to one inevitable outcome: Makeva's death. But the calmness that Yuri displayed was chilling. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was cold, calculated, and methodical. His plan had been set in motion, and there was no turning back. Yuri's first step was to hire a hitman. Through a middleman named Dmitry Dale, he was introduced to Jovan Joseph, a gunman who had carried out similar jobs before. Yuri spoke to Dmitry with the same ease he had shown in his everyday life. There was no hesitation, no signs of guilt. The way he discussed the hit with Jovan made it seem almost routine, like this was just another transaction in a life full of financial pressures and missed opportunities. But the stakes were far higher than anything he had imagined. Yuri knew what needed to be done. He told Jovan exactly when and where to strike. Makeva would be alone in the house, and he would create an alibi that would keep him far from suspicion. Jovan, in return, would get paid for carrying out the job. To Yuri, this was the solution to his problems, a way to escape the suffocating pressure of debt and failure. He thought it would be quick and clean, but little did he know that his entire plan was based on a fatal misconception. Yuri had believed that upon Makeva's death, the $500,000 life insurance payout would go straight into his hands. But there was one massive detail he never checked. He never knew that Makeva had made her grandmother the sole beneficiary. The policy wasn't going to him. The money he thought would be his was instead intended for her family. And that would be the cruel twist that unraveled everything. The irony was staggering. Yuri had plotted the murder of the woman he once loved for a sum of money he could never collect. His obsession with securing his future blinded him to the reality that Makeva had already planned for her family's future without him. Her grandmother would receive the payout, and Yuri's greed had led him to a dead end. Had Yuri's desperation pushed him into making such a critical mistake, or was this oversight an indication that his plan had become so all-consuming that he stopped thinking clearly? What would have happened if Yuri had known the truth about the insurance policy? Would he still have gone through with it, or was it the lure of financial freedom that clouded his judgment? In the hours after the crime, the police initially suspected a random robbery. It seemed plausible. Someone had broken into the house, and Makeva had been caught in the crossfire. The house showed signs of forced entry, and the scene appeared chaotic, as though the intruder had been looking for something. It made sense at first. After all, home invasions weren't uncommon, especially in affluent areas. But as investigators combed through the evidence, the details didn't align. The neighbors reported no unusual activity. There were no signs of a struggle or any property missing. And that's when the detectives began to focus on the people closest to Makeva. The theory that the crime could have been committed by a stranger seemed less and less likely. A deeper investigation into the family dynamics and Makeva's life began, and that's when suspicions began to fall on the one person who stood to gain the most from her death, Yuri. His strange calmness in the days following the murder made detectives start to question his alibi. Why was he acting so composed? Why wasn't he distraught, as a grieving husband should be? Could a husband who loved his wife truly be capable of orchestrating such a brutal act? Or was there something more that the police hadn't discovered yet? Did Yuri's behavior indicate guilt, or was he simply a man overwhelmed by his financial situation? As the investigation progressed, the evidence began to point in one direction: Yuri Jenkins. Police found multiple inconsistencies in his alibi, and his actions in the days leading up to the murder were scrutinized. His interactions with Dmitri and Jovan were traced, and the police discovered that he had been in constant communication with them. But perhaps the most damning clue came from Yuri's own reaction to Makeva's death. While others were devastated, Yuri remained eerily calm. It didn't sit right with the detectives. What made Yuri act this way? Was it because he was simply too numb from years of struggling to feel anything at that moment? Or was his calculated demeanor a sign that he had no remorse, no empathy for the life he had just taken? His behavior was unsettling, and the police couldn't ignore it. In a case where the grieving husband should have been at the center of the investigation, it was instead his own actions that kept pulling him further into suspicion. Could it really be this simple? Could the husband, who seemingly had everything to lose, have orchestrated his wife's murder in cold blood? Or was there someone or something else driving this complex story forward? The detectives had their suspicions, but they couldn't yet prove Yuri's involvement beyond a shadow of a doubt. At this critical juncture, the investigation was in the balance. Were the police looking in the wrong direction? Could someone else have been involved in planning and executing the murder? Or was Yuri, in his desperation, the one who had masterminded everything from the start? The deeper the investigation went, the more questions surfaced. Who was truly responsible for this? And was it possible that Yuri Jenkins was not just the grieving husband, but the cold, calculating murderer who had set it all into motion? The morning after the murder, the police arrived at the scene of the crime. Makeva's home was a crime scene now, but it had once been a place of warmth, a home filled with the noise of children and the promise of a future. Now it was eerily silent, with the only sounds being the bustle of police officers and the clink of evidence bags being sealed. The crime appeared to be a break-in gone wrong, but something didn't sit right with the investigators. It was too clean, too planned. This wasn't just a random act of violence. As detectives combed through the house, questioning Makeva's family, the first layer of suspicion began to fall on Yuri. His reaction to the murder seemed off. While his family mourned, his demeanor was distant, almost too controlled. When asked about his wife's death, he spoke with a calmness that did not match the grief expected of a husband who had just lost his partner. His alibi was shaky, and his answers to the police were vague. The inconsistencies in his story began to raise more questions than answers. Could it be that Yuri's grief was just a mask? Was it possible that his calmness was a sign of something much darker? Or was he simply overwhelmed by the loss of his wife and trying to keep himself together for the sake of their children? Was this the behavior of a man in mourning or a man hiding something? The investigation continued, and the first major breakthrough came when detectives looked into Makeva's life insurance policy. The investigators had been told that she had a significant policy, and it was assumed that Yuri would be the beneficiary. But when they checked the details, they found a shocking revelation. Yuri was not the beneficiary. The money, instead, had been directed to Makeva's grandmother. The fact that Yuri was so eager to collect life insurance money but was unaware of this crucial detail cast doubt on his motivations for the murder. Why had Yuri never checked the beneficiary details? Could he have been so blinded by his desire for financial gain that he overlooked something so important? Or was there a deeper layer to this? Was Yuri's entire plan based on a lie he told himself? What does this discovery tell us about his mindset? And how far was he willing to go to get the money he thought he was owed? As the detectives dug deeper, surveillance footage from nearby areas began to surface. The footage showed Dimitri Dale, the middleman who had introduced Yuri to the gunman, leaving the area around the time of the murder. In another video, Jovan Joseph, the hitman, was seen meeting with Dimitri a few days before Makeva's death. The dots were slowly starting to connect. Yuri wasn't acting alone. The picture that emerged was one of a carefully orchestrated plan involving multiple players, but the real question was, how far did Yuri go in orchestrating this murder? Was he the mastermind, or was he simply part of a larger conspiracy? Could Yuri's ties to Dimitri and Jovan explain the chillingly calm way he had gone about everything? Were these men working together? Or was there a deeper network of individuals who had their own role to play in this twisted plot? As investigators continued to uncover evidence, they began to focus on Yuri's background. The police learned more about his financial struggles, his mounting debts, his desperation to escape the life he had built. Yuri had been living a double life, playing the part of a loving husband and father while secretly harboring thoughts of a different future. His obsession with wealth, the need to provide a better life for his family, was consuming him. But the question lingered. Was it just the money that drove him to murder, or was there more to this story? The detectives were drawn into a tangled web of financial desperation and personal betrayal. As they pieced together the puzzle, the conclusion began to feel almost inevitable. Yuri had orchestrated the murder of his wife for money. The police began to focus on the fact that the murder appeared financially motivated. The insurance money, the debts, the desperation. All of it pointed toward a motive that seemed almost too perfect to ignore. Could it really be that simple? Was Yuri driven solely by the promise of wealth, or was there another, more sinister force behind his actions? What drove a man to kill his wife when he had so much to lose? And how did the pressure of his own choices lead him down such a dark path? But as the investigation moved forward, false leads started to cloud the picture. Personal vendettas and potential family disputes were considered. Investigators explored the possibility that someone close to Makeva had a motive to harm her, but each lead seemed to fizzle out. Could someone else have wanted Makeva dead? Could Yuri have been framed? Or was there a hidden motive that the police hadn't yet discovered? Was someone else responsible? Or was this a case of a man whose desperation led him to make a fatal decision? Was the murder part of a larger conspiracy? Or was it solely Yuri's plan all along? The more the detectives investigated, the more questions arose, and the clearer it became that Yuri's role in the crime was undeniable. But could there be more to the story than anyone realized? Could someone else have been pulling the strings behind the scenes? At this point, the question remains. Was Yuri Jenkins the mastermind behind the murder of his wife, or was there someone else pulling the strings from the shadows? What do you think the next big clue will be? Let us know your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Your insights could be the missing piece to solving this twisted case. As the investigation neared its conclusion, the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The detectives had spent weeks piecing together the evidence, each thread unraveling the truth behind the crime. Forensic evidence, including traces of Yuri's DNA found at the scene, matched perfectly with the timeline of the murder. Witness testimonies corroborated the details of the crime, and the surveillance footage from nearby cameras provided the smoking gun. Literally. The videos showed Dimitri Dale meeting Jovan Joseph multiple times before the murder, and even more damning, Yuri's interactions with both men. These were not mere coincidences. They were the actions of a man who had been orchestrating the entire crime from the shadows. The footage was clear. Yuri's involvement in the planning of Makeva's murder could no longer be denied. His meetings with Dimitri, his conversations with Jovan, and his carefully crafted alibi all pointed to a single, undeniable truth. Yuri had hired the hitman to kill his wife. The police had suspected this for weeks, but now they had the evidence to prove it. Could anyone have really believed that the man who was supposed to protect his family could be the one to destroy it? Could the evidence against Yuri have been too clear to ignore? Or was there still a possibility that someone else could have been behind the murder? But just when it seemed like the case had been solved, new developments started to surface. As detectives prepared to make an arrest, some disturbing new leads emerged, casting doubt on the entire investigation. The police briefly considered the possibility that someone else could have been involved in the murder, a personal vendetta perhaps, or a deep-seated family grudge. There was talk of others who might have had a reason to harm Makeva, but each new lead quickly dissolved. Every false trail they followed only pointed back to Yuri. His actions, his behavior, and his motivations made it clear. He was the one who orchestrated the murder of his wife. As more evidence was gathered, Yuri's obsession with wealth and his lavish dreams came into sharper focus. The detectives found documents revealing his escalating financial troubles, the debts that weighed on him, and his desperate desire to escape the life he had built. The more they dug, the clearer it became that Yuri wasn't just a man driven by greed. He was a man consumed by desperation. His need for money, his obsession with a life he couldn't afford, had pushed him to a place from which there was no return. Was it money alone that drove Yuri to murder, or had his personal failures and fear of failure become the true motivators? Were these false leads merely distractions, or were they a sign that someone else might have had a role in pushing Yuri toward his final deadly decision? Yuri Jenkins was arrested, and the full extent of his plan to murder Makeva for her life insurance money was exposed. The detectives, who had once struggled to connect all the dots, now held a clear picture of the crime. They had solved the mystery. Yuri had hired a hitman, manipulated his wife's life insurance, and orchestrated her death for his own personal gain. But just as the case seemed to come to a close, a shocking twist emerged. Yuri would never have received a penny from Makeva's life insurance policy. In a heartbreaking twist, it was revealed that Makeva had made her grandmother the sole beneficiary of the policy. Yuri's entire plan had been based on a mistake, a fatal misstep. He had murdered his wife, believing that he would receive the payout, only to learn that he had no claim to it whatsoever. The reality of this final revelation was devastating for everyone involved. Makeva's family, who had already been grieving the loss of a loved one, now had to process the full extent of the betrayal. Yuri had not only killed Makeva, but had done so for nothing. Could Yuri's greed and sense of entitlement really have led him to make such a catastrophic mistake? How could he not have checked the beneficiary details? Was this a fatal flaw in his thinking, or was it just the result of a man blinded by ambition? But just when everyone thought the case was closed, a final, chilling twist emerged about Yuri's past. A past that had been hidden from everyone, including those closest to him. As the investigation continued, new details about Yuri's financial history came to light. He had been running from decades of debt and failed promises. His obsession with money wasn't just a recent development. It had been with him his entire life. From a young age, Yuri had been desperate to escape his past, to live a life of luxury, and to provide for his family in a way he never had. But in the end, it wasn't just money that had pushed him to murder. It was his fears. The fear of being poor again. The fear of failure. The fear of never living the life he thought he deserved. Yuri had spent his entire life running from debts, both financial and emotional, and it was those debts that ultimately caught up with him. Had the weight of his past and his constant pursuit of wealth led him down this path? As the final pieces fell into place, the tragic truth became clear. Yuri Jenkins hadn't just murdered his wife for money. He had murdered her because he could never escape the life he'd always feared. The price of his ambition, his failure, and his desire for more had cost him everything. Could anyone have predicted such a horrific ending for a man who was so desperate to escape his past? Yuri Jenkins's arrest was a devastating moment for his children. Their world had been turned upside down. One day they had a father who had provided for them, and the next, they were left with nothing but the painful truth of his betrayal. The man they had trusted, the man they had grown up with, was now a convicted murderer. Their grief wasn't just about losing a parent. It was the haunting realization that the person they once admired had committed the ultimate act of betrayal. How could they ever look at their father the same way again? Could they ever reconcile the loving dad they knew with the cold-blooded killer who plotted their mother's death? For Makeva's family, the emotional toll was no less severe. The loss of a beloved daughter, a sister, and a mother was already unimaginable. But the revelation that her death had been orchestrated by her own husband cut deep into the very fabric of their lives. They had once welcomed Yuri into their fold, believing him to be a loving partner who would protect Makeva and their children. But now, they were left with a shattered family dynamic and a deep sense of betrayal. Could they ever forgive Yuri for what he had done? Or was the wound too deep to heal? How could they move forward knowing that the very man who should have cared for Makeva had been the one to take her life? The emotional weight of this crime reached far beyond the courtroom. Makeva's children, now without their mother, faced a future clouded by pain and confusion. How could they ever come to terms with the fact that their own father had been the one to end their mother's life? The legacy of Makeva's death was something her children would carry with them forever. No amount of money, no life insurance payout, could ever fill the emptiness left behind by the woman they had lost. The community, too, felt the weight of the tragedy. Friends, family, and neighbors who had once admired the Jenkins family were left grappling with the truth. How could such a heinous act have been committed by someone they had trusted? Could anyone have seen the signs? Or was Yuri's true nature hidden behind a mask all along? The aftermath wasn't just about justice. It was about the emotional devastation left in its wake. Was there any way to rebuild the trust that had been shattered? Or would the scars of this betrayal last for generations? For Makeva's family, the grief was not only about losing her, but about the painful realization that Yuri's presence in their lives had been built on a lie. Could they ever forgive him, knowing what he had done? Or would they forever be haunted by his actions? As the case closed, the community struggled to find closure. Yuri Jenkins' conviction was final, and the legal system had done its job. But the true cost of his crime could never be measured in a courtroom. The children had lost both parents in a way, Makeva through death and Yuri through betrayal. And Makeva's family was left to pick up the pieces, their world forever altered by the actions of someone they had once called family. How could anyone move on from such a profound loss? The truth had finally come to light, but the emotional scars would never fade. Could anyone truly find peace after such a betrayal? Would Makeva's children ever have a chance at healing? Or was their future forever marred by the darkness of their father's actions? What do you think about Yuri Jenkins' actions? Was it pure greed that led him to orchestrate his wife's murder, or was there something even darker at play? Could his financial struggles and obsession with wealth have been the driving force behind this chilling crime? And what about redemption? Does someone who commits such a horrific act ever truly deserve a second chance? Or is it beyond forgiveness? Let us know your thoughts, your theories, and your take on this shocking case in the comments below. We want to hear from you. What do you think was going on in Yuri's mind during those critical moments? Was he a victim of his circumstances, or was he the mastermind of his own downfall? Share your opinions and join the conversation. We want to dive deeper into this mystery with you. The shocking truth behind Yuri Jenkins's crime is just the beginning of the dark tales we have to share. There are countless other untold stories of betrayal, manipulation, and twisted deception that will leave you speechless. And we're just scratching the surface. What happens when the most trustworthy people in our lives turn out to be the ones with the darkest secrets? Our next true crime story is even more chilling. Stay tuned, because the twists and revelations are about to get even darker, and we won't hold back on any details. You won't believe what we're about to uncover next. If you think this case is intense, wait until you see what's coming next. It's going to be a roller coaster of emotions, secrets, and shocking truths that will keep you on the edge of your seat. If you're as fascinated by these dark, twisted true crime stories as we are, then don't wait. Hit that subscribe button right now. Make sure you're part of the True Crime Unlimited family and turn on the notification bell so you'll never miss a story. Join us as we uncover the most shocking, jaw-dropping cases, stories that the world is still trying to understand. We're on a mission to break down the mysteries of the darkest crimes in history, and you don't want to miss a second of it. With your subscription, you're not just getting access to chilling crime stories. You're becoming part of a growing community that is obsessed with truth, justice, and the real stories behind the headlines. Millions of subscribers already know the thrill of these deep dives, and now we want you to be a part of this journey with us. We're aiming for millions of subscribers, and we can't do it without you. So hit that subscribe button, turn on the notifications, and be ready for the most twisted, gripping true crime stories you've ever heard. Together, let's uncover the truth behind some of the world's most perplexing crimes.